Welcome back to this Skillcast. I got Matthew Nickel with me here today to tell you a little bit about his story into the skilled trades. Our paths crossed a few years ago now, I think, right? 2 years ago, where I was hosting a class for boilers, and he wanted to come in and get his licensing for that skilled trade. And I don't want to tell you too much about it. I like his story, and I want you to hear it directly from here. So thanks so much for coming here with me, Matt. I appreciate it. Now, listen, let's start firstly about your background. Like, we've had some people here on the podcast before where they said their family life was very encouraging into the skilled trades, and we've had the opposite, the same. My family, I know, for example, pushed me to consider college, and I don't bemoan them on that, but I want to hear about your background, your story. How did you get connected to the skilled trades?
So when I finished school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And college definitely wasn't it at the time. First off, I wasn't ready. I didn't have the discipline.
Do you think that was a personal choice, or were there people?
It wasn't an option.
Yeah.
For me.
Okay.
It wasn't something that was fiscal. Wasn't something I couldn't afford.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been a good opportunity for me earlier, but it's not something that was also available either.
Yeah.
So what I ended up doing right out of school was going to the coal mine.
Yeah.
Need a license for that too. That's a trade in itself. It's a very niche trade, not super in demand.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because obviously the topic about coal is widespread right now.
Yeah.
Everybody's got opinions about that. But I don't think there's a whole lot of people that understand, for example, what would you need a license in?
Okay, well, to be underground in the coal mines, you have to do a year apprenticeship. It's a dangerous job. It's a demanding job. It can be dangerous if you're not prepared and you're not responsible.
Certainly.
And you're not educated.
Yeah.
Right. It's not something you can just go and do.
Yeah.
This isn't something where you could take an application, go to McDonald's. The first year was a little bizarre. There's a lot of manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
But after the first year, I got the opportunity to get into heavy equipment and run some of the machinery underground. And then I got laid off a year later.
Yeah.
Not all trades are the best trades.
Yeah.
There's some that are significantly more marketable than others.
Yeah.
And I had to learn the hard way that coal is just not in demand as much as it once was.
Yeah.
And it's not going to come back.
Yeah.
There's always a demand for coal, but it's very steady. It doesn't really fluctuate much. I didn't want to spend another 2-3 years working somewhere else, get called back to the coal mines, do a couple of years there, because it took too long. So I ended up just going into roofing for years after that.
Okay.
Once I got laid off.
How'd you get connected with roofing in that way? Obviously, you're looking for a new way to make money, right?
West Virginia don't have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of work. I had to drive an hour and a half just to go to work when I was in the coal mines.
Wow.
So I had to leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is home, but I can't make a living there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I ended up leaving, going to Pittsburgh, and opening up the newspaper, trying to look for jobs that I was qualified for, and there wasn't much.
Yeah. And this is in 2009, if I'm tracking with you?
08, 09, the housing market crashes, the job market crashes.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of options. So, I take this job roofing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's seasonal. There's
not
a lot of work in the winter.
Yeah. It can make some good cash when you're younger. I had some time of doing that as well. When I was in college, I would be able to do like night jobs and side jobs with roofing, and bar none, any other job that I could get quickly, that one was paying the most. Like, I felt like a king. I also lost probably 10 or 12 pounds in working a season on that too.
Yeah, I wouldn't be weighing what I weigh if I still roofed.
No doubt.
I'd also be hurting every day.
Sure.
You could call that a trade.
Yeah.
But I don't know about that.
Well, this is an interesting point because the skilled trades a lot of time are seen in two little buckets. One, it seems like people know the skilled trades as HVAC, electricians, plumbers, and like these 5 different things. And one of the things we often try to really push out here is that there's hundreds of skilled trades,
there's
right?
tons of niche trades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So,
and in that way too, I think sometimes when we look at things like roofing, or as we're talking about here, it can get lumped into this other bucket that once in a while we want to remind people that, you can't step just right into HVAC, for example. You can't step right into framing a house, for example. You can't step right into the coal mine. Yeah. Like there's things that you have to learn, and there's steps that you have to take. And, we're not against education. We're not against skills.
You make a really good point about how you can't just step into it right away, right?
Yeah.
Becoming an HVAC tech and getting your 608 universal license, it's not hard. You can do this stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
Once you get your license, you pass the test. That don't mean you know what you're doing.
Fair.
I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
If you can't turn a wrench, you're not going to be able to use that license.
Yeah.
So it's beyond just hands-on experience. That bookwork helps.
Yeah.
When I first got into what I consider true trade, right, that was about 2 years ago and a few months. I spent 4 years working in a forge shop. I did magnetic particle testing on forging. I'm looking for defects in my forgings. That did not prepare me to work in a utility building or in a powerhouse running high-pressure boilers or turbines.
Which is what you're doing today.
Which is what I'm doing today,
Yeah.
right? That is a trade, right? I had to go learn that. I had to take tests to be an NDT operator. I had to educate myself to be a Brunel operator.
Yeah.
You're working with steel, you're testing metallurgy and all that stuff. Tensile strength, ductility, all that stuff. That's my job. And, you get good at it, people leave you alone. You come in every day, you do your job.
Certainly. Yeah.
And you solve problems and you leave.
Well, and that's the thing about working in the skilled trades that I often hear a refrain about is like, you build your skill, you build your value.
Oh, yeah.
Come in and get the job done. And people will leave you alone. It seems that sometimes, there's exceptions to the rule there.
Yeah,
but,
if you're an introvert and you like to keep to yourself, get in the skilled trade.
Yeah, get into boiler work, by the way, too, right?
You'll be very lonely.
That's super.
If that's what you want, Yeah. But all joking aside, I spent 4 years doing that and getting good at it. And then I'm looking around me and I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I have a daughter coming.
What led you into STEAM?
So I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, right? 4 years in, I'm looking around, I'm looking on job postings. There is nowhere that I can sell this. I don't mind staying somewhere and getting comfortable, but at the same time, though, I don't want to be trapped there. And I was trapped.
Yeah.
If something ever happened to the forging industry and it bottomed out, I had no way to then sell any skills from that. I didn't consider trades. It just happened as I'm looking and I'm struggling. And I spent a good year struggling to figure out, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I will say right now, it's never too late to become what you could have been.
Yeah.
You don't have to be like, oh, I'm in my mid-40s, mid-50s. What do I do with the rest of my life? Man, it ain't too late to start now.
Yeah, certainly.
So I'm looking and I see a posting for Powerhouse listing at Can Drop Forge, right? We have steam drop hammers. That's how we make our forgings. You stick a die in there, you heat up that hunk of steel, you put that hot hunk of steel in the die, and then you hammer it out, and then you got your very interesting looking part, whether it's a tank gear or landing gear for a plane or helicopter hubs, all kinds of weird stuff.
Sure.
I didn't even know how our steam drop hammers work.
Yeah.
I had no idea how steam worked, right?
Yeah.
So I see this posting by my own company, and I'm like, that sounds interesting. I didn't apply because I'm like, I ain't qualified for that. I was wrong. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Yeah.
But I didn't apply, right? And I spent months more looking and figuring out what I'm going to do. And I didn't have no answers. We had a project. They needed me to shift to another shift.
Yeah.
So I told my supervisor, I said, listen, I'll take care of you. I'll do this. But, I'm eventually going to have to say yes to one of these many jobs that are offering me if you don't put me back on day shift. He's like, hey, we have a listing in our powerhouse for an operator. We'll train you. You need hours and you need time in there before you're even allowed to sit for your test.
Yeah.
Right. I had already known that job was posted for months. I was like, I'm not qualified for this.
You're explaining your story, which you've stepped into this trade, stepped into that trade, and the one that you're leading into now, it was actually built from some supervisor internally, right? That gave you the chance. I don't want people to miss that, to say, like, sometimes getting into some of the skilled trades that maybe you're more interested in is that you'd have the ability to move up from where you are, right?
At that time, that was a lateral move.
Yeah.
But once he told me about it, I went home and I sat down and I looked it up.
Yeah.
This is real.
And like most skilled trades, it's not really well laid out on Google.
Not at all.
Do you know what I mean?
Open up YouTube and you'll have 100 videos teaching you how to be an HVAC tech.
Yeah.
They exist. You don't have to pay for this.
Sure.
So boilers, on the other hand, I can't open up YouTube. I can't find nothing, man.
Yeah.
I can't find nothing. So I'm trying to figure out, do I even want to do this trade? Can I sell this? I didn't even know it existed. Well, I'll tell you what, you can sell it. I think the average age for an operator is 47 years old. Somewhere in that neighborhood, mid to late 40s. That's the average age for an operator, and it's getting older every day.
Yeah.
So if you want to leave school, high school, and you want to be an operator, you don't have to be super excellent at picking this stuff up. I'm normal. Once I got to the point where I had my license, they were coming to me. I really like that stability. I can have a new job next week.
Yeah.
I don't want one. I'm very happy where I'm at.
Yeah.
Right. But I have that stability. I'm no longer boxed in a corner like I was at Can Drop Ford.
Yeah.
That's no longer the case anymore.
Yeah.
I'm in demand. Yeah. And the more I learn, the more in demand I get. I've been doing this 2 years now. When I first started, I did a couple months just doing basic general mates. I'm telling you, mostly pushing a broom, accumulating my hours next to the boiler, and not really learning a lot.
Yeah.
I was struggling. I didn't really have anyone to learn from. And Can Drop Forge was desperate, right? They needed a licensed operator. Legally, you need a licensed operator in that utility building. It's the law. They get desperate, so they sent me to school. That's when it all really started. First off, I learned my limitations. 5-6 hours a day, 5 days a week studying, you're not going to get nothing out of that. And I'm going to tell you that from experience. You get so burnt out after about an hour. And if you keep going after that, everyone's different, right? I have my limitations. I get about an hour and a half of study, and then I can't retain no more. I need to put it down and move on.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of people that, one of the stigmas they feel is that the skilled trades are not an intellectual choice for their career. There's actually a lot to learn, and like other kinds of spheres of life, you get out of it what you put into it a lot of times, right? Like there's a way to get along with your career and kind of skate, bottom baseline.
Are you familiar with the 80-20 rule? So 80% of your effort will give you 20% of your results. Yeah. That's usually how that goes, right? So you put all this effort in and you're only getting 20% of that back, really. If you figure out how to absorb that 20% and shave off that 80%, because everyone learns different. You got to learn how you learn.
Sure.
And then that's when the snowball starts moving.
Yeah.
When you figure out how you learn, then you can start making progress in this. And I'm telling you, these textbooks are thick.
Yeah.
And they're miserable. They're boring. They're dry. Ask me how much I like steam and I care about steam. Ask me if I'm passionate about steam. Go ahead.
Are you?
Not at all. I am passionate about stability.
Yeah.
I am passionate about being good at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Passionate about being needed almost, and I'm needed. The more you know, the more you're needed. The more you know, the more stable you are. And if there is a stigma that, hey man, he turns a wrench all day. No, not really. Yeah. I get paid for what I know, not what I do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you that right now. I spend more time being bored than I do working.
Yeah.
But problems happen. And stuff happens.
Yeah, and a lot of times with this big equipment, like we often find at Steamworks when we're training on boilers, is like part of the gig that you're signing up for is not always turning a wrench, but it's rehearsing the problems that could go wrong because there's a lot of utility work and people rely on that. So let me ask you this. As you got your license and you found more stability as you described, right?
Not quite. No, I ain't gonna lie.
Yeah.
When I finally got my hours in, they were able to shave it down from 2 to 1,000. This is before they changed the laws to 700.
Sure.
At 1,008 hours, I went and I took my high-pressure boiler operator exam, and I scored 72%. I was one question away from failing.
Man.
And then 2 weeks later, they put me on a shift all by myself.
Yeah.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
There's a right way to do things, and there's a wrong way. and that was wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you right now, that was not safe. It was negligent, but, I got wife, kids all. I don't have the luxury to be comfortable. I got to press, and I don't even know how I learn yet. You know what I mean? I've only been doing it 6 months at that point. You know what I mean? I just did a 3-week course at Steamworks. I don't know how to tell by looking at a valve if it's open or closed.
Yeah.
Now I do. I'm going to tell you that right now. I know how to tell if a valve's open or closed, right? And there's only so much you can pull out of a book. There's only so much you can get from a 3-week course, right? There's a lot you can learn from a book. And I'm going to tell you right now, 90% of what I know is from a book, and that allowed me to then absorb the other fraction of it when I got to see it. I'm like, oh, okay, it all makes sense now. You know?
Yeah. And I often find that when you're pressing hard to learn something, it's kind of like the fire hoses at you in that way. But there's a period of time that whatever you learned is all knotted up in your brain, and it takes a period of time to let those subconscious knots untangle in that way. Let me ask you this, because now you're in the trade, and I want to see how it connects to your family life, because this is the reason that you even...
That's the only reason I do anything.
That's right. Me too. We have a very similar story
all
in that way, right?
There's a lot of things that are really important in life, right? I don't identify with my work. I am not the work I do.
Yeah.
I'm a husband first.
Yeah.
And then I'm a father. I was born to do that. That's what I'm good at.
Yeah.
That's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
But how do I meet my obligations as a husband and a father?
Yeah.
Right? How do I do that? I got to press. You can't just settle. So I got to press. I got to figure out how to do better for them.
Yeah.
And everything I do is for them.
Do you feel like in that way? Because that's the whole point of this podcast, is to give people a vision, not for just working forever in the skilled trades and this is the best and rah, but rather that the skilled trades can provide happiness or happy lives, stability, as much as other careers that require college.
Right.
We're trying to elevate to say there's opportunity here, because nobody's really aiming at accounting in a high firm. When you aim at that, very prized position with a lot of money, you're aiming at happiness, right? That is the purpose of this podcast, is to kind of highlight people's lives to say, has this been a viable choice for you?
Oh my gosh, best decision I ever made.
Yeah.
The most difficult thing I ever did. A lot of people out there are way more talented mechanics. They're way more talented electricians. They have a natural ability to learn mechanical things, right? They can visualize it in their head. I struggle a little bit with that. That I know my weaknesses, and I know my strengths. It wasn't quite easy for me, but I imagine it's easier for others. I've seen it. I've been at Brewster Cheese now for a year and a half. Yeah. I saw that there was a problem with how I was doing things. One, in regards to studying, and two, in regards to obtaining on-the-job experience. So Candraw Ford's been running 82 years. They have Babcock and Wilcox boilers built by the Army Engineering Corps in 1942.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those boilers are still running. I had a problem one day, and my feed water pump was not supplying water to my boilers. My boilers were firing at 100%. My boilers were drying up. They're well below the site class, and for a good solid 2.5, 3 minutes. That's a long time to not have feed water in your boiler.
Yeah, that's about the worst situation. Yeah.
I got water flowing at 200 gallons per minute into this boiler, or could have been, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why my boiler's not getting water. My second week as an operator, all by myself. It was not a good experience. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, am I cut out for this? Do I know, should I be doing this? Because why do I do anything, right? It's because I got people that count on me.
Yeah.
I lost all my confidence.
Yeah.
Can I do this? I thought, man, no, I can't. But I continued to press. I figured out what my shortcomings were. I asked for help. I reached out to my instructor from Steamworks. I asked some advice. How do I do this? How do I do that? One of their tips was to follow the steam line, right? Follow the feed water line. Learn the flow of my plant. Man, that's all great and well, but I don't understand how a valve opens and closes at the time. You know what I mean? I'm a licensed operator sitting at a desk. I just barely passed my exam. I saw a problem. There wasn't enough things going wrong at Canton Drop Forge for me to then learn. The only thing that set me aside that made this all possible is that no matter what your ability is, no matter what your capacitance for learning is, I don't stop. I'm going to continue to figure this out. I will figure it out. I don't care how long it took me. And it felt like forever, but I'm 2 years into it. And I'll tell you what, that was my attitude at the time, but I was wrong.
Yeah.
I could do this. I am good at this. I will figure this out. And I did, right? I figured out that I'm studying too hard. I'm not absorbing anything after an hour. I figured out that I'm not separating my work-life balance well enough.
Okay.
I'm spending too much I spend all my free time on these books and trying to understand this, and I'm struggling, right? So I figured out what worked for me. Just learning that tells me I can't do university. I can't do college. And it's not a discipline thing. There's nobody more disciplined than me. You know, I'm not going to say I'm the most disciplined guy in the world, but you're not going to find anybody with more discipline. How about that? However, I don't have that ability. You know, I don't absorb and digest these things fast enough. And I think a lot of it has to do with you can't just tell me something works this way and then that's okay for me. I need to know why it works that way.
Sure. Yeah.
I need to understand the mechanics and science before I then understand the equipment.
Yeah, I get you. And I mean, when I got into the industry, I didn't even know what a valve was. And it took a long time to understand how to become a skilled tradesman in that way.
Yep.
Here's what I want to ask you as we get to the end here. The skilled trade that you chose right now is the boiler world.
Yeah.
If there were other people out there in the world right now considering different trades, because you chose that one, could you take a couple sentences or a paragraph or so and talk about why should you become a stationary engineer, for example?
They need you. They need you more than you need them. If you're licensed, they need you. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of stability. You know, do you enjoy troubleshooting? Do you enjoy problem solving? Do you enjoy being the person that's leaned on? Are you assertive? Are you confident?
Yeah.
Can you be assertive and confident? If you got answers, someone will pay for them.
Yeah. And of course, we're a little biased on the STEAM world, being STEAM guys ourselves.
There's more trades than that.
But in that vein, then, can we back the lens out a little bit and ask the question, why should someone consider the skilled trades in 2024?
2024. Okay. In the 1980s, they stopped funding vocational schools and high schools. And it was significant, right? And then it happened again, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 2000, 2004, I believe, I'm not sure, we'd have to whip out Google, but No Child Left Behind Act. They rewarded schools for how well you could pass a math exam or read, or, you know, do science or history classes. You know, what happens when they reward all that, but if you fall behind on those exams, as the school as a whole, you know, all your students falling behind, right? Because now you have vocational classes, right? They're spending more time in vocational classes than they would like sitting down studying a math quiz. You can go be learning industrial electricity at high school in a vocational class.
Sure.
And you can be learning circuits and capacitance and reactors, and you learn electron flow, the difference between electron current flow and conventional current flow.
And so what did that kind of, not distraction, but that there was a systematic change, no doubt, right? And so what has that resulted in today?
So the domino effect is they rewarded public education for sending you to college, right? Or passing the exam. You know, I'll tell you right now, passing an exam or going to a class doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
Sure.
You know, and that's not something it's oversaturated now. You know, there's not a lot of demand in today's market for going and getting a 2 or 4 year degree. There's a lot of competition, and that's not something that heals and fixes overnight. You know, it takes 20, 30, 40 years, you know, and we're only just now really within the last 5 to 10 years talking about the void that not having a trade skill is causing our economy and our society as a whole. There's a massive void out there for skilled trades, and it can't be fixed overnight. It's a long and arduous process to fix that, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing in place. It hasn't even started, you know?
Yeah, and I think that what
it's only getting
people
worse.
need to hear, and I'm glad that you came and shared your story, because we can continue to get it out, is it's not just a skills gap that needs to be filled. It needs to be a change in people's minds that actually they might be a good fit for the skilled trades, and they might actually benefit just like you have benefited in your life from it, and I have as well. Matthew, I really appreciate the time that you've shared with me and with all our listeners as well. And I'm really glad to have you in the skilled trades. And I'm especially glad, I'm a little biased, that you're a stationary steam engineer, because that's my trade, dude. I love it. All right, man. Nice to meet you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our video. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to like and subscribe us on our channels. And if you want to continue the conversation to find out if there's a skilled trade that's built for your future career, be sure to pick up our book called Skill Stigma at skillstigma.com.